Hey Chris, have you got anything to drink so we can have a little chat?
Oh, I do. I'm just drinking water today.
I should be drinking water because it's really hot and sunny. It's meant to be still the rainy season,
Hmm.
and it's not, so that's not very good. And we had water rationing for the past year, and they did just stop it because we were getting a lot of rain, but now it's gone really sunny and hot. We'll probably need rationing again.
And just a reminder for our listeners, you're in the Bogota area of Colombia.
That's
Yes.
right. Yes. So it's not meant to be hot here ever, for one thing. Yeah. But we do have a rainy season and we have a dry season, and we're supposed to be in the rainy season, but it's really blue skies. And as you know, Saturday I got burnt.
Yeah.
I got too happy having such warm sun.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've got a cacao that I'm drinking. It's not hot though, so it's a room temperature cacao.
Well, lukewarm cacao in hot weather, it seems like a good trade-off.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's okay.
So, there is something that happened, and today's recording date is April 16th, 2025. There is something that happened just hours ago today
Yeah.
that I think has been on your mind, and I'm interested to hear a little bit about what's going on.
Yeah, so I woke up wide awake at 3:50 a.m., which was 9:50 a.m. UK time, and there was a breaking news alert which didn't wake me up, but which I saw, which said that the UK Supreme Court was about to make a ruling on the definition of woman. And I knew that's a big deal for the UK, and it's because Scotland had done something and then got taken to court in the UK, so now Scotland's not allowed to do what it was doing. And I'm not going to get into a lot of the details of the ruling, especially since it's only been a few hours, and even BBC News is still saying we're trying to figure out what the implications are, and so it's still unfolding story. However, I have kept over many podcast episodes with you in various different podcasts. I have shared with you a book by H. Peter Steeves called Up from Under the Rulers, the Anarchic Phenomenological Communitarian Manifesto. It's a mouthful, but you know what? I really love this book. Um, been less than a year since I read it, I think. And what I keep coming back to is the section, it's like chapter 4, um, on rights. Because they were saying this morning, okay, they're just talking about what the definition of a woman is when it comes to like equal rights legislation. And that doesn't mean that trans folks don't have rights too. I mean, like, they were trying to say this isn't to say like we don't recognize trans people, so it was like trying to say, and it doesn't mean that, that trans people should be discriminated against, like there was a lot about that. But of course, the headlines won't be that. The headlines are, oh, and I did check X after this to see what they were saying. I was mainly looking for the trans people that I follow to see what they were saying, but it was too fresh and they hadn't said anything. But all these other people were like, oh, common sense prevails. A woman is a woman, all of that. And aside from the fact that a woman, a man, those are social constructs, putting that aside, because the court ruled that a woman is the biological sex at birth, and there's all kinds of reasons why that just doesn't hold water. Um, Biologically, it doesn't hold water. So, but what I want to think about is how rights, discourse, doesn't protect us. It's like if we look at what supposedly we have the right to as humans, like human rights, you know, and we look at the genocide of Palestinians and like, but don't they have the right to dot, dot, dot? I mean, to live for one thing. Like, it just doesn't matter, does it? Like, what the international courts can say they have the right to something, but they have no right to enforce it. Like it's just so many words. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't, like, there are places where it might make sense to try very hard to get your rights. Like, I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying that relying upon the rights discourse is pretty much saying that you're putting your trust into these institutions to protect your rights. Because first you need to have your rights recognized by whom? Who are these people that have the power or the right to give us rights? It's like really poor logic. Um, and people who are stateless, do they have rights? Like, do you need a state to give you the right? Do you need the international court to give you, but what can they do? If you're being targeted with genocide, it means nothing. It means nothing to have rights. And I'm going to read this paragraph from the book. Says, in 1994, when the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional, a revolutionary force in Mexico, announced their demands, the world was confused. The Zapatistas, it seemed, didn't want more and better jobs or access to free health care or greater participation in the institutions of their society, including the government. They did not demand any rights. What did they hope to gain if they made no demands for their rights to be respected, for more rights, for different rights, for greater rights? The Zapatistas wanted only to be free to live on their own, to get out of the system of rights and laws completely, to be in charge of their own lives and land and future without persecution. The Mexican government was quick to respond. The Zapatistas had no right to ask for such a thing. It makes you think, well, what? It like gives us like a paradox, because it can make people think, well, what what would that be like to live in a way where we don't need rights, that they don't even make sense? And in your house, they don't make sense either. Like he gives some examples of like the brother takes the toy from the sister and like, are there rights? Like, can she say, you have no right to take, it's like, it's just a different world to talk in rights. It's very impersonal. It's individualistic. The book goes on about how, the whole book is basically about the problem with liberal framing of things. And it's very individualistic, like I have the right to this. And now we're saying, well, women have the right to this and trans folks have the right to that. And it puts people as if it's a competition when, of course, we want women, including trans women, to be safe, to be able to live their lives without fear, to be able to have the jobs they want, to play sports, to, like, we just want everyone to be able to flourish, to live lives without fear. And people keep talking about things like prisons And it's like people feel unsafe in prisons no matter what gender is in there. I mean, thinking about putting anyone in a space like that with violent people, no matter what gender, is problematic. It's not just like a trans woman going into a woman's prison and then the women feel unsafe. There are women who feel unsafe in there because of the guards, because of other women, because of et cetera, et cetera. It's not caring about everyone's safety. And that's what it brought up for me when I heard the news. And I know it has a lot of ramifications on policy and it's over to the politicians now. But it just reminded me of what I had read in this book about rights and how they're not really keeping us safe in general.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And it's all that you've shared in terms of what's going on in the United Kingdom is something I had no knowledge of at all. So I'm glad that you have surfaced this for us. And I don't know the demographics, if you will, of our listener base. I imagine that many of them are in the United States and may not also be aware of this. Though, interestingly enough, after you told me that this was happening, that this has happened this morning, I went on LinkedIn, and the first post at the top of my feed was a post exactly about this. So I found that interesting and perhaps gave me a sense of maybe hope is the wrong word, but it made me feel like this will become hopefully quickly. Uh, Hopefully, it will surface quickly in the awareness of people in the United States of America and in other places as well. As you were talking, many things came to my mind, but one thing, sentence that kept coming to my mind as I was listening to you is this sentence from the Declaration of Independence here in the United States of America. So you might imagine, and of course, you know from your own experience being born and raised in the United States of America, in the USA schooling system, there's a certain emphasis on America as the free and the great and the this and the that. And part of that is reading things like the Declaration of Independence. And so perhaps that's why this particular sentence came to mind. The second paragraph, the Declaration of Independence, first sentence, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." End quote. And the way I hear this sentence in the context of what you're saying is that the sentence is saying these are rights that we don't have to give to anybody. It is a fact of nature that those rights already exist. Now, of course, the irony of this document is that even in its creation, there were certain people, particularly women, um, enslaved human beings, that were not seen to have these rights because they were not really seen as human. So they were not included in the word we. They were not included in the phrase all men are created equal, and so on and so forth. So there's a certain paradox of a document that says it is just a fact of nature that certain rights exist, but also we are stating this fact of nature, which in our minds actually does not include all people. And so I'm grappling with this as you're speaking. And I'm also grappling with this idea, something that's come to my mind every once in a while. I'm not a scholar of international law. I'm not a scholar of geopolitics. And I know that what I'm about to say has been discussed in many, many different ways, probably for who knows how long, probably hundreds of years, this question: is international law real? And it seems ridiculous as it's coming out of my mouth. I think in general, people would say there is a such thing as international law, but that does not mean it is enforced. Sometimes I feel that there's this idea of a law is not a law without enforcement. I don't know what actual scholars would say because I'm sure there are many nuances there that I'm missing, not being a practitioner. But these are just things that are coming up for me as you're saying this. Because there's also this idea that there are certain laws that people may see as just that are not enforced. And then there are other laws that some people may see as unjust that are very well enforced and enforced upon the most vulnerable and most marginalized people, not only in our societies here in the so-called West, but in the world. And you've just talked about the Palestinians, uh, the genocide of Palestinians, and there are multiple genocides going on around the world as well. And I feel like all of these contradictions come into play. And you and I have talked in many ways about the hypocrisy, the paradoxes, the contradictions, if you will, in seeing who gets to have their rights protected, who gets to have these just laws enforced for their benefit, and who doesn't have the right to have rights, if you will.
Mm. Yeah. It also brings up what's happening with the deportations to El Salvador and how the court ruled that they couldn't do what they were doing. And they ruled that the US government or whoever needs to facilitate the return of one of these guys who's lives lived in Maryland.
Yes.
And it's like, well, let's decide what facilitate means. Um, let's ignore the fact that we could have returned these flights midair when the ruling happened. It just shows that, and I think I've said this before, that a lot of this is just a gentleman's agreement. It's you just need people to go along with it. Otherwise, it all falls apart. And the Trump administration and the international courts and all the things that we're seeing happening are just people going, make us, make us do what you know, go ahead and try and make us. And no one can make them. I mean, I think they probably could, but it would be in a way that liberals would find very hard to stomach because it would mean like a kind of coup. You know, it'd be like, we need to take back the US government. We need to uh, go in and arrest Netanyahu. We need to, do all of these things that like liberals think, well, no, it's like when you've been caught out, you like resign. You're supposed to resign if they find out that you've broken national security by adding someone to a signal chat or, and everyone's just like, no, make us. Court says this, we're not going to do it. Try and make us. And we see the implications of that. And so saying, well, Trump can't run for a third term, make him not run for a third term. Make him run for election at all. Like he can just say we're not going to have elections. It happens in other countries.
Yeah.
And people have a hard time believing that it's happening to the United States.
Yeah, and when I hear the word liberal and perhaps liberalism in this context, I'm thinking, again, not pretending to be a scholar, and we've talked about these different terms before. I'm hearing in today's conversation the idea that institutions are where power comes from. Therefore, we as people must build and protect and preserve institutions. And then when we talk about things like rights and privileges, we put the expertise and the knowledge and the experience and the history into institutional memory such that institutions in some way are given the authority, if you will, to make these decisions. And then we simply follow what they say because that's what good people do. They follow authority. And so it's interesting to see, well, interesting is not the word I'm looking for, but I'll say instead, I agree with you in terms of your view, a view shared by many other people of what's going on. The idea of we don't have to. Who cares what anyone says? Who cares what a piece of text in a real or virtual document says? You don't want us to do something, make us stop. And we see this play out. I agree with you completely that this is playing out not just in terms of this Maryland man for context for our listeners. A Maryland man was, and I'm going to get the nuances wrong, so forgive me in advance. A Maryland man was wrongly deported by the USA government, meaning the USA government admitted that they wrongly deported him. The Supreme Court, the US Supreme Court, in a 9-0 ruling recently said that the Trump administration must, quote, facilitate the return of this man. And then the administration began to make statements about the word facilitate, as you were just pointing out. I think he's been in detention for at least 1 month now, even though he was, according to the US government itself, wrongly deported. So I'm not even sure what to say. I feel like there's been different conversations about is it a constitutional crisis, or maybe if this happens, then it will be, but it's not yet. Is it a coup? Oh, it's technically not a coup. Is it an auto coup? What is an auto coup? All these pieces of jargon that, yes, from an academic perspective, and really from a legal perspective in terms of what a court can rule on and not rule on, what's the standing and all this stuff. Yes, these discussions of terminology matter in those specific contexts, but we're still talking about humans who are under the thumb of people who don't care what other people have to say. All they respect, if you can even use the word respect, is force. And they're the ones with the force. So, hey, too bad. Unless you have enough force to make us stop, we'll just keep doing whatever we wish. So, these are just the things that I'm sitting with. And I don't want to lose sight of how you opened our conversation, which is with a ruling about the definition of a woman as descended from the UK Supreme Court earlier today,
Mm-hmm.
April 16th. I think perhaps what I'm leaving with is this idea of if we, and we can say, who is we exactly? But if we believe that humans do have rights that are facts of nature, what does it mean for us to defend those rights for everybody? What does that actually look like? What does it mean for us to embrace and embody the right to be alive, regardless of what any institution says?
Mm.
And I feel like, I mean, for me, especially, not to get into too much of my story, but most of my history was spent working for or in large institutions, including the US federal government, places where if the institution says you do this, that's what we do because that's what the institution said. And it was really that simple. So for me to envision other ways of living, other ways of being, other ways of working, if you will, that's a real challenge for me.
Mm.
And one of the things I like about our conversations is you have that perspective, that alternate perspective, and you bring
Mm.
that to our conversations. And I believe part of that is a function of your being a communitarian anarchist, which we've talked about a little bit. But I might imagine that you were this way before you discovered the terminology communitarian anarchism, which is why perhaps you were drawn to that way of I wouldn't even call it like some sort of political alignment. I would just say it's a way of thinking, a way of being.
Yeah. I mean, this book by H. Peter Steeves says that it's apolitical because it's like a philosophical, it's like the way humans are. Um, and what you were saying about putting faith into institutions in this book as well is where it says, and I've referred to it before, that we're giving up part of what it means to be human to these institutions that are not human. And so that's why we want to get away from the rights language because that you're automatically talking, when you talk about rights, you're talking about individuals, you're talking about a system, an institution that protects rights, that doesn't protect rights. And what if we lived like the Zapatistas, in a way where we're just meeting each other's needs? It's not about like, well, I'm feeding you, neighbor, because you have the right to be fed. No, I'm feeding you because you're a human being and I have access to resources that you need. And this is what it means to be human, to look out for each other, um, where we are. And of course, with the internet and planes and easy travel and everything, we can have a larger concept of who's out there that needs us, who needs us. So, yeah, yeah, I keep coming back to these same concepts from this book, Up from Under the Rulers. Unfortunately, it's difficult to get the book, but I do recommend. It's quite a hefty book, but it's accessible, although it's philosophical and it's making a logical case for anarchism, for communitarian anarchism. And yeah, I really appreciate the intellectual challenge of it. And I can see how it plays out in reality with the news that we're seeing every day, which is why we're committing to every week coming together and seeing what's on our minds with regard to the news. 12 weeks into the 13 weeks into the Trump administration, which brings up a lot of issues for everyone around the world.
I'm also very grateful for these conversations. Yeah, we will have a couple of things for our listeners in the show notes today. Perhaps there's a URL for, at least if people could read a little more context about the book Up from Under the Rulers.
Mm-hmm.
I'll see if I can find a link also for the US Supreme Court 9-0 ruling. There's been much to do about it over the last few days, as you can imagine. And who knows what's going to be up the next time we talk. But
Yeah.
in any case, I do look forward to it.
Yeah, me too, Chris. Good to be with you. See you next time.
See you next time. Bye. You have been listening to Morning Tinto with Heather Luna and Chris Musay Sequeira. Each time we record, we use the news of the day to be as freshly brewed as possible So subscribe, follow along, and comment if you can. Let us know what you think, and we will talk to you soon. Bye bye.